China didn't just enter the global shipbuilding industry. They took it over completely. In less than 20 years, they went from building almost nothing to constructing more than half of every commercial ship on Earth. And they didn't do it with some revolutionary technology or secret innovation. They did it through sheer scale, ruthless pricing, and an infrastructure build-out so massive it changed the entire industry forever. But to understand how they pulled this off, you need to see where it all started. In the late 1990s, China's shipbuilding industry was practically non-existent. South Korea and Japan dominated the market. Europe still had prestigious yards turning out luxury vessels. China was barely a footnote, building small cargo ships that nobody outside Asia wanted to buy. But behind the scenes, something massive was already in motion. The Chinese government identified shipbuilding as a strategic industry and poured billions into coastal development. They weren't building a few shipyards. They were building entire industrial complexes along the coast. Massive plots of land in provinces like Jiangsu, Zhejiang, and Liaoning were designated for shipyard construction. We're talking facilities spanning thousands of acres, with direct deep-water access and room for expansion that dwarfed anything in Europe. And the money flowed differently than anywhere else. State-owned banks offered financing packages that no private shipyard could match. Low-interest loans, delayed payment terms, land practically given away for development. The goal wasn't profit in year 1 or even year 5. The goal was capacity. But capacity meant nothing without people who knew how to build ships. So China launched a massive workforce training program. Technical schools churned out welders, engineers, and naval architects by the tens of thousands. They brought in foreign consultants from Europe and South Korea to train local teams. They sent Chinese engineers abroad to learn advanced techniques, then brought that knowledge back home. Then came the supply chain build-out. China didn't just want to assemble ships. They wanted to make everything that goes into them. Domestic steel mills ramped up production of marine-grade steel plate. Factories started producing marine diesel engines under license from European manufacturers. Component suppliers for electronics, pumps, and navigation systems set up operations near the shipyards. Every piece of the puzzle was being positioned. And they started with the simplest, highest volume vessels, bulk carriers, and basic container ships. These weren't glamorous, but they were exactly what the booming global trade needed. China took technology licensing deals with European design firms, copied proven hull designs, and began pumping out ships using standardized production methods. By the early 2000s, Chinese shipyards were operational and hungry for orders. But being operational and actually winning orders were two completely different battles. China had the shipyards. They had the workers, they had the supply chains. Now they needed customers, and the only way to get them was to offer something no other shipyard in the world could match: price. Chinese shipyards started bidding on contracts 20 to 30% below Korean and Japanese competitors. Not on a few ships, on everything. Bulk carriers that cost $120 million from a Korean yard, China would build it for $90 million. Container ships, tankers, cargo vessels, it didn't matter. They undercut everyone. And it wasn't just competitive pricing, it was deliberate market disruption. Western shipyards called it unsustainable. Korean executives said the Chinese were selling below cost. But the orders kept flowing to China anyway, because shipping companies don't care about sustainability. They care about their bottom line. But here's where it gets interesting. While competitors were complaining about unfair pricing, China was doing something far more important. They were scaling up production capacity at a speed the industry had never seen. Between 2000 and 2008, China built more new shipyards than the rest of the world combined. Massive facilities like Jiangnan Shipyard, Dalian Shipbuilding, and China State Shipbuilding Corporation expanded to sizes that made European yards look like workshops. We're talking about dry docks over 1,600 feet long, gantry cranes that could lift entire ship sections weighing thousands of tons, automated welding systems running 24 hours a day. And they didn't just build big, they built smart. Chinese yards adopted production line techniques borrowed from car manufacturing, standardized hull sections, modular construction, parallel assembly of multiple ships in the same facility. What took a European yard 18 months to build, a Chinese yard could finish in 12. Then came 2008. The global financial crisis hit, and shipping demand collapsed overnight. Orders were canceled, ship prices crashed. Yards around the world started laying off workers and shutting down berths. But China did the exact opposite. They kept building, they kept expanding, they kept taking orders at prices that would have bankrupted any private company, because this wasn't about short-term profit. This was about market share. European shipyards couldn't survive the downturn. Germany's famous yards closed. Spain's facilities went bankrupt. Even South Korean giants started consolidating, merging struggling divisions just to stay alive. And while they were retreating, China was advancing. By 2010, Chinese shipyards weren't just competitive anymore, they were starting to dominate. The country's total shipbuilding capacity had exploded to over 40 million deadweight tons per year. They were winning 70% of bulk carrier orders. Container ship contracts were flooding in, and their order books were full for the next 2 to 3 years. The foundation was built. The scale was achieved. But taking over the entire industry? That required one final push. By 2015, China wasn't just building the most ships, they were building the ships nobody thought they could. For years, the narrative was simple. China handles the cheap stuff. Korea and Japan build the advanced vessels. LNG carriers with specialized containment systems? That's Korean territory. Massive container ships with cutting-edge efficiency? Japanese expertise. China was supposed to stay in their lane, churning out basic bulk carriers and simple tankers. But that narrative was about to shatter completely. Chinese shipyards started winning contracts for ultra-large container ships. We're not talking about standard vessels. We're talking about ships that can carry 24,000 20-foot containers. Floating cities of steel longer than 1,300 feet, wider than 200 feet, designed with fuel efficiency and automation that rivaled anything coming out of Seoul or Tokyo. And they weren't just building one or two as proof of concept. They were building them by the dozen. Orders came flooding in from major shipping lines: Maersk, MSC, CMA, CGM. These weren't companies taking a risk on cheap Chinese quality. These were industry leaders choosing China because the quality gap had closed and the price gap hadn't. Then came the LNG carriers. These are some of the most complex ships in the world. Specialized tanks that keep liquefied natural gas at -260 degrees Fahrenheit. Advanced insulation systems. Sophisticated safety features. For decades, this was a market controlled by Korean yards, like Hyundai Heavy Industries and Samsung Heavy Industries. China broke in anyway. Hudong Zhonghua Shipbuilding started delivering LNG carriers that met every international standard. And they didn't just meet them, they started setting delivery records. Ships completed ahead of schedule. Quality inspections passed on the first attempt. Suddenly, Chinese yards weren't the risky budget option anymore. They were the efficient option. But the real turning point was capacity utilization. While Korean and Japanese yards were fighting for scraps of the premium market, Chinese yards had captured everything else. Oil tankers? Chinese. Bulk carriers? Completely dominated by China. Container ships of all sizes? Chinese yards owned 70 to 80% of global orders. And the numbers became impossible to ignore. By 2020, China was building over 50% of all commercial ships on Earth by gross tonnage. South Korea held on to maybe 25%. Japan had dropped to single digits. Europe was practically gone from commercial shipbuilding entirely. But it wasn't just about volume anymore. It was about control. Chinese shipyards had order books stretching years into the future. They had the capacity to build 45 million deadweight tons annually. They had domestic supply chains so complete that nearly every component, from the steel hull to the navigation systems, could be sourced within China. And here's what that meant for the industry. China could set prices. If Chinese yards quoted a certain price for a vessel, that became the global benchmark. Korean yards couldn't go higher without losing the contract. They couldn't go lower without bleeding money. The entire market moved based on what China decided to charge. By 2023, the takeover was complete. China wasn't competing in the global shipbuilding industry anymore. They were the global shipbuilding industry. Over half of every commercial vessel launched into the ocean was built in a Chinese yard. The country that barely existed in shipbuilding 25 years ago now controlled the entire market through sheer infrastructure, relentless scaling, and a pricing strategy that eliminated nearly all competition. They built the yards, they built the supply chains, they built the ships, and in doing so, they built complete dominance over one of the most critical industries in global trade.